There are two men at the same party. One is holding a drink he doesn't even like, laughing a little too hard at jokes that aren't that funny, agreeing with almost everything the woman in front of him says. He's doing everything he was told women want, being nice, agreeable, and easy to like. Across the room is another man. He's respectful, but he isn't trying to impress anyone. When he disagrees, he says it calmly. He doesn't chase approval or panic when there's a moment of tension. He's comfortable with who he is. By the end of the night, only one of them walks away with her number. And it isn't the man who tried the hardest. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Women don't lose interest because a man is kind. They lose interest because what often looks like kindness is actually insecurity, people-pleasing, and the constant need for validation. Most men never realize the difference. So pay close attention, because this isn't a video telling you to become arrogant, cold, or disrespectful. It's about understanding the psychology behind attraction and why the behaviors you believe make you more attractive may be pushing women away instead. By the end of this video, you'll understand why so many genuinely good men keep getting rejected, and why the answer has almost nothing to do with being too nice. Here's the hidden problem. Most men are taught, somewhere between childhood and their first heartbreak, that the way to be chosen is to be agreeable. Say yes. Compliment often. Never cause friction. Make yourself easy to be around, and love will follow as a reward for good behavior. It sounds reasonable. It's also almost completely wrong. Women aren't losing interest because a man is kind. They're losing interest because kindness, in the way it's usually performed, has quietly become a stand-in for something else. A stand-in for having no opinions of his own. A stand-in for having no direction. A stand-in for a personality built entirely around another person's approval. Psychologists call this a loss of differentiation. It's a term used in relationship research to describe a person who no longer has a stable sense of self once another person enters the picture. Their mood depends on her mood. Their plans depend on her plans. Their opinions bend around whatever keeps the peace. At first, this feels like devotion. But attraction doesn't run on devotion alone. It runs on a sense that the other person is still their own person, still standing on solid ground, still someone with a center of gravity that doesn't move just because someone new walked into the room. Most people never notice this, because the nice guy pattern doesn't look like weakness on the surface. It looks like generosity. It looks like effort. It looks, on paper, like exactly what a good partner should be. But there's a difference between generosity that comes from abundance and generosity that comes from fear. One says, I have plenty to give, and I choose to give it to you. The other says, please don't leave, I'll do anything. Women can feel that difference long before they can explain it out loud. Think about a man named Daniel, not someone dramatic, not someone with a tragic backstory, just an ordinary man who spent years believing that if he was attentive enough, patient enough, understanding enough, he would eventually become irreplaceable. He canceled his own plans to match hers. He agreed with her taste in movies, even when he didn't share it. He apologized first, always, even when he wasn't sure what he'd done wrong. For a while, it worked. She liked having someone so easy. But easy and exciting are not the same currency. And eventually she started describing him to her friends the way you'd describe a comfortable couch. Reliable, familiar, not something you think about when you're not sitting on it. This is the deeper psychological mechanism most people miss. Attraction is built on a small, healthy amount of unpredictability. Not games, not manipulation. Just the natural unpredictability of a person who has their own inner world, their own standards, their own life, that doesn't fully bend around someone else's presence. Behavioral scientists sometimes describe this through the lens of scarcity. Not scarcity as a trick, but scarcity as truth. A person with a full life, real friendships, real ambitions, and real boundaries is naturally less available in a way that manufactured availability can never fake. Daniel didn't lack love. He lacked a life independent enough from her to be attractive within the relationship. Here's another example, further back in history. In the early days of courtship studies in the 1950s, sociologists observed something counterintuitive. Partners who displayed complete, unwavering agreement were, over time, trusted less than partners who occasionally disagreed. Constant agreement started to look less like compatibility and more like performance. People began to wonder what the agreeable partner actually believed underneath all that nodding. That's not a flaw in human nature. It's a survival instinct. Evolutionary psychology suggests we're wired to notice congruence, whether someone's actions match an internal compass, because a person with no internal compass is a person who can't be predicted in a crisis. And unpredictability, in the bad sense, quietly triggers distrust, even in comfortable everyday moments. So the deeper truth isn't stop being kind. It's stop being kind as a strategy. There's a difference between a compliment given because you notice something true and a compliment given because you're hoping it earns you safety. Women, more often than men realize, can sense which one they're receiving. This is where identity theory becomes useful. Psychologists describe identity as something built through repeated choices, especially the small ones nobody's watching. What you order when she asks what you want, whether you speak up when you actually disagree, whether your week has shape and purpose even when she's not in it. Every time a person overrides their own preference to avoid friction, they're not being generous. They're quietly erasing a piece of the person the other side was originally attracted to. This changes everything once you actually sit with it, because it means the fix was never about becoming colder or more distant or learning some manipulative trick to seem unavailable. The fix is about becoming someone with a self-worth being close to in the first place. Let's talk about what that looks like in real behavior, because insight without action is just a nice thought that changes nothing. First, delayed gratification matters more than instant approval. A man who can sit with a moment of tension, a disagreement, an awkward silence, without rushing to smooth it over, signals emotional regulation. That's not coldness. That's someone whose nervous system doesn't panic just because someone else is briefly unhappy with him. Second, purpose outside the relationship matters enormously. Not a side hustle for show, a real direction, something he's building whether she's watching or not. This single shift changes the entire emotional dynamic, because now his value doesn't come from her presence. It exists independently, and she becomes someone invited into it rather than someone required to complete it. Third, honesty replaces appeasement. Saying "I don't actually agree with that" in a calm, non-defensive tone is one of the fastest ways to rebuild the kind of respect that constant agreement slowly erodes. Not aggressively, not to prove a point. Just honestly, the way one confident adult speaks to another. Fourth, boundaries replace over-explanation. A person secure in themselves doesn't need to justify every decision at length. "I can't make it tonight" is a complete sentence. The instinct to over-explain usually comes from fear of disappointing someone. And fear-based communication is exactly what quietly kills attraction over time. What happens next surprises most people who make these shifts. It's not that women suddenly chase them, it's that the entire relationship becomes more stable, because now there are two full people in it, instead of one person and one reflection. Think back to that party. The man across the room wasn't cold, he wasn't playing games. He simply hadn't handed his sense of self over at the door. He could be kind without needing that kindness to be repaid with attention. He could disagree without panicking about the outcome. That's not a technique. That's a nervous system that trusts itself. This is the identity transformation underneath everything we've talked about tonight. The goal was never to become less kind. The goal is to become someone whose kindness is a choice, not a request for permission to exist in someone else's life. Because the moment your calm stops depending on someone else's approval, you stop performing a version of yourself designed to be chosen, and you start becoming a version of yourself worth choosing. That shift doesn't happen overnight. It happens in the small moments. The disagreement you don't take back. The plan you don't cancel just to keep the peace. The compliment you give because it's true, not because you're hoping it buys you something. Somewhere between the man who agrees with everything and the man who's forgotten how to compromise at all, there's a quieter, steadier place. That's where real attraction actually lives. So here's a question worth sitting with. Where in your own life have you mistaken agreement for connection or self-erasure for love? If this gave you something to think about, subscribe for more videos like this one. There's a lot more worth unpacking.